Today, we dive deeper into some specific plugins around authentication. Within our Kong plugin hub page, you will find those specific plugins that cater to the authentication requirements for your governance of API calls. So let's go ahead and test one such plugin, which is the Key Authentication plugin. So the idea here is to apply the Key Authentication plugin on a route wherein it is mandated that an API key needs to be supplied. So let's go ahead and check this out here, and this particular plugin, as I said, mandates the API key to be applied on this particular route, which is the test auth route. Let's go ahead and test the call. When I make a call to this test app v1, which is the test auth route, you see that the no API key found message pops up here saying that we are unauthorized. Now, to make it possible, I have a consumer who in this case is called demo consumer, and this particular demo consumer essentially has a key associated with themselves, and that's being provided by the Key Authentication here, which is the credential attached to this consumer. Now, when this consumer comes in with their API key, to be specific here, I enable the API key and it's called demo. Go ahead and hit the same endpoint. It is now being allowed. So essentially, we apply the Key Authentication plugin on a particular route, which is mandated to be governed through an API key, and only calls which are sent through by consumers or from applications that hold the API key are allowed to go through. Now let's look into something which most of the organizations today rely on is OAuth 2 authentication models. To that respect, we have the OIDC plugin, and one idea here is that we rely on an IDP, for example Keycloak, to be the provider of the authentication or the authenticator themselves, but Kong being the route which routes first the request to the IDP, gets the authenticated token back, and with that token it makes a call to the underlying service, which is the upstream service. In that case, we are using here the OIDC Keycloak plugin via the OpenID Connect. So to read about it, you can go ahead and check the plugin hub page. But essentially, what we do in order to configure it is that we apply the well-known ID or the endpoint of the issuer, which in this case is Keycloak. And we select the authentication methods that you want to allow or are being allowed by your IDP provider, providing the client ID and secret, and going ahead and configuring this plugin on a particular route. And once this plugin has been configured on the route where we have configured it, then all the API calls that go through this particular endpoint will need to first get authenticated or authenticate themselves against the OpenID Connect using Keycloak as the IDP provider, get the token, and only then go through to the upstream service. To check that out, let's go ahead and try the call to this particular endpoint. So let me just very quickly take this endpoint into the browser. And when I make a call here, you see that we need to provide the username and password first of all to enter here. And this is the part where we are going ahead and sending the request to acquire the token. And once we get that, we see that the response is being sent back, and this is where we also get to see that the bearer token here was being attached to the request, which was the requirement for being authenticated for this particular route. So here's the wrap that we have these very different plugins, in this case like a JOT token authentication plugin and so on and so forth, which will help you to go ahead and use either an existing IDP or an existing authentication method, or apply basic authentication to Key Authentication in order to authenticate your calls to the API that go through to the upstream, which are being governed by the Kong gateway.